Welcome to this episode of Intellectual Catholicism. Today, I'm here once again with my good friend Hassan Ahmad. And I just want to say really quick before we get started that I'm in my new apartment in Connecticut. I started my job as the director of apologetics on July 1st, and so I'll be working under Bishop Frank Caggiano. So I'm very happy to, be in my new place. I'm going to start kind of making things a bit neater so that I have a real nice looking studio, but that's kind of down the line. I'm getting my feet on the ground at this point. Hassan, what have you been up to since our Harvard days?
Well, I mean, you can see my beautiful blank white wall behind me. We just moved, so we're setting up still and, working on a few projects and starting a new job. So it's all fun. Thanks for having me on, Suan. It's great to be back. And he said my last name was Hassan Ahmad. That's a bit of an inside joke for those who don't know it. It's I use Ahmad, and I guess the Arabic pronunciation would be Ahmed. But we had a good professor at HDS who would say Mr. Ahmad. So if you prefer, that's great too.
Yes. I took a class with him actually on my last semester there, and he loved me. I loved him, and it was a great class.
Yeah, the inimitable John Levinson.
That's right. His Eminence, if I recall properly.
Absolutely right.
So Hassan, just before we get into the meat of today's subject, I'm interested just in your kind of online activity. Did you come across this topic and see the controversy that's been spilled out? Or was it kind of like I told you and then you found out about it?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, this sort of comes up every few years. When I was doing some research before coming on here, well, first of all, it's something I've thought about for a long time and was kind of very present in my life growing up. But in the Catholic world, this topic is kind of recycled every, 5 or 10 years. And I did see the initial program, I forget what channel it was on, with Jay Dyer and I think Tim Gordon was on that too, where this came up. I follow Jay Dyer. I actually, I like a lot of what he does. And a lot of his content's pretty interesting. So I've heard him make this argument a number of times in different debates with Catholics and others. So I know the topic, but I didn't know how kind of big it got this recent time around, where everyone and their mother is tweeting about this. So
right,
and making YouTube videos.
So we're not going to try and react to everything that's been said and published online so far. So I don't know if some people might be watching this and they might say, oh, Suan, you didn't tackle what Ortland said. You didn't tackle what Trent Horn said. I mean, that's kind of by design. I think I'm just trying to have a conversation on the topic with Hassan. And speaking of Hassan, you are a convert from Islam to Catholicism.
Indeed, I am. I grew up Muslim. I am originally from Pakistan. I was born in Pakistan, came over here when I was pretty young, grew up in Michigan. Naturalized. But I grew up Muslim in a small town in Michigan, and pretty practicing, devout family, Hanafi family. And in college, I was doing some soul searching, had an opportunity to really dig into the history of religion, was starting to think about these things in, I think, a more serious way, though I've always been interested, even from my youth, in questions about God. I was always very interested as a Muslim about the salvation of Jews and Christians. Maybe it was just because I was in a majority, at least nominally, Christian environment where, I wanted my friends to be okay.
Yeah.
And I remember that was a big way through which I looked at the Quran growing up and tried to understand it. And
where did you go for college?
I went to Princeton. Undergrad. I studied politics, political theory, and medieval studies. And then I got my master's at Harvard in comparative religion. I would encourage everyone, shameless plug here, please go to Exploring the Quran and the Bible, YouTube channel, Exploring the Quran and the Bible, that I run with a dear friend and very learned professor, Dr. Gabriel Said Reynolds. There's some awesome stuff there. So those are sort of my projects that I'm up on. And I've been on this channel before. I had the pleasure to get to know Suan while he was in Cambridge. And yeah, it was great. So Anyway, I was in college. I had a turn towards kind of more intense religiosity, really taking religious ideas seriously. And that sent me on a journey to kind of both soul search and research, and which culminated ultimately in me kind of, coming to the Catholic faith. I was very interested in the question of continuity, this, I would say, fairly fundamental Islamic idea that there is kind of one revelation throughout history, and there's always decay and corruption after a given prophetic message has been delivered. So I wanted to basically find that in history. That was really the thrust of my research when I was looking into Christianity at first, and also Islam, and to see, like, where did these kind of corruptions happen? How do you go from basically ancient Israel to Islam, right? And the Quran has all these stories about, Noah and Adam and Noah and David and Solomon and Moses and Jesus and John and others, and Jonah and Mary. And I wanted to see basically what history had to say on the matter, right, as I was studying at Princeton. So that led me ultimately to the Catholic faith, because I see a real continuity between, well, and I want to say continuity, not in some sense in exact replication and stasis, but a real development and continuity between the religion of ancient Israel and ultimately culminating in the sacrifice of Christ, his resurrection, which I think there's just abundant historical evidence for. And I find, when I was looking into the historical Jesus stuff, really compelling arguments for, Christ in some approximation to the image that you receive in the Gospels. And I was just so compelled. I found the figure of Christ, and especially the Gospel of Matthew, which was the first I read, to be so compelling, just so compelling. I felt like he was speaking right to my heart, and, spoke with a sort of wisdom about the tragedy of just existence, of suffering, and, the right response to that. Or rather how you respond to that in a way that is total self-sacrifice, that I fell in love with it. So, and I found that, the gospel was sort of preserved from the lips of Christ to the lips of the apostles in the early stratum of tradition in the New Testament, then which gets developed by, St. Paul and the first, second, third century Christian apologists and fathers, and, later on into the sort of, Roman Church, so to say. Anyway, that's a long story short, but very happy home here in the Catholic Church, in the finished work of Christ. And though, I'm always very interested in studying Islam, also always Christian-Muslim relations, I try to approach it in a way that isn't polemical per se, though it's hard to avoid sometimes when you're stepping into, like, real conclusions that real people have to draw from real data, rather than kind of just academic discourse. So I like to, I have a respect for a lot of things in Islam, and most of my family is still Muslim. And I think that there's a lot, Christians can learn about and from Islam. So.
Well, Hassan, to get to the subject of today's conversation, I want to get your reaction, and we'll get into more depth in the next question, but just your reaction to the claim that Christians and Muslims worship the same God, but also how you would have reacted to that statement when you were Muslim. I'd be fascinated to hear both responses. Maybe you can start with the Muslim reaction first, and then your reaction, I guess, now.
Yeah, the Muslim reaction, I mean, I don't even have to give it my own words. You can just go to Surah 29 of the Quran, and which says, "Do not argue with the people of the book except in the way that is best, or in a good way, pleasantly, except for those who commit injustice." So, you can be a little more mean to them, but try to be good to the people who are good to you in debate. And say, "We believe in that which has been revealed to us and revealed to you. And our God and your God is one, and we are Muslims in submission to him." Muslim just means submitters. So we are submitters, and we submit to him, basically, right? And The Arabic is interesting too, because وَقُولُوا آمَنَّا بِالَّذِي أُنزِلَ إِلَيْنَا وَأُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ, right? So that which has been sent down to us and that which has been sent down to you. And there are many parts in the Quran that you have this. Surah Baqarah, Surah 5 as well, Surah Ma'idah, and honestly throughout, where you have these references to kind of, previous revelation, previous communities. I'll touch on this later too, but there's a line in the Quran that says, Christians are in some way or form like the closest in at least attitude to the believers, right, to Muslims. So I had a profound respect for Christianity growing up. I had a love for Christ. I remember one time, this is a bit of a digression, but I was watching South Park as a 7th grader. Ill-advised. I didn't have the most parental supervision, but I was watching South Park as a 7th grader, and they're making fun of Jesus, right? They're making fun of Christ. And I remember as a Muslim boy, 13 years old, I was just filled with disgust. I was like, I turned the TV off. I was like, this is disgusting. I'm not going to watch, at the time I thought this great prophet. Now I think, the incarnate Logos be ridiculed in this way by these two, morons that, on this show, which is maybe funny 1 out of 20 episodes. So anyway, I had a deep love for Christ. Many Muslims have a deep love for Christ, of course. I remember a story of my grandfather when he was reading these kind of lives of the prophets, little anecdotes about the prophets in Islam, and he was weeping once, and he said, Jesus, he walked on water. Did you know that? And that's actually after I had converted that I heard him talking about that, and I thought it was quite beautiful. His heart was very much moved by deep love in the way that he was taught to love Christ. Not the love that he deserves. I mean, he deserves more love than even my grandfather had for him, but a real admiration, devotion, real love for Christ as he understood him. So all this to say that I would have 100% said, absolutely, we believe in the same God. Now, important qualification really in the background of all of this is the Trinity, right? Is the triune God. And that, from the Muslim perspective, you kind of get two opinions on that. You get one opinion, which is that, well, when the Quran or when early Islamic materials talk favorably about Christians, about us believing the same, about Christians and Muslims believing in the same God, what they're actually talking about is real Christians, right? Unitarian Christians, or Christians that aren't committing shirk or association. This is very popular, especially these days, in kind of Muslim discourse. I don't think that's historically plausible or tenable at all, though. I think when the Quran thinks of Christians, it's thinking of Christians. It's not thinking of a lost sect of Ebionites or, whatever wacko theory people have about, sort of Judeo-Christianity surviving. Now, this is like a scholarly rant that, it really grinds my gears. It's like the fool's gold in Islamic studies is trying to find Judeo-Christians who secretly preserve the faith of Jesus in Arabia. But that's one, right? The second is to say, yeah, I mean, we disagree with Christians. They worship Christ. We don't, they don't worship. A Muslim would say we don't worship Christ, but the Father, that's also our God, right? And I mean, there's times in the New Testament, of course, and I think the letters of Paul were, the Father and God of our Lord Jesus Christ is meant. So in some sense that is true. Like, God the Father was the God of Jesus Christ in his flesh, right? And there's been a lot of interesting conversations about monarchical Trinitarianism. I'm kind of in that camp. So I think that there's a little bit more discourse that we could probably have there. But of course, Muslims, this should go without saying, Muslims and Christians have very different conceptions of God. And of course, you have to allow for diversity. I say Muslims and Catholics have very different conceptions of God. And this allows for diversity in the Islamic world. because there are some versions of Islam that actually come quite close to almost like a Trinitarianism or a Binitarianism or something like that. Okay, all this to say, yes, of course, we believe in the same God. I think both as a Muslim and now as a Catholic. I've been Catholic for what now, 7 years or so. So I mean, I still got not that many years on me, but
2 years
I would.
ahead of me.
Oh, cheers. 100%. I would affirm the same, that we believe in the same God. And I mean, I think there are two ways to approach this, basically. One is like a literary historical approach, which has already been done. If you've been following this discourse, I mean, you said we're not going to dwell too much on what this or that person said, but, I think, okay, first of all, Tim Gordon made these arguments in the initial conversation. I think he had a subsequent video on it, which is actually quite good, going through different, Gregory the Seventh, Suarez, Bellarmine, Pius X, which I'll do a little bit of here as well. Trent Horn also went through this, I think, pretty well. Even Jay Dyer in the initial video, I think the Samaritan woman came up in the Gospel of John, and he admitted that, she was at least orienting her worship towards the one God, right? And Gavin, I think his argument is like, okay, well, before Christ, you could kind of reference the one God, but after Christ, you can't. I don't want to misrepresent, because I don't know Gavin's argument very well, but all this to say that I think you can build a literary historical argument looking at, and specifically the Islamic context. When you have Christians who are encountering Islam, they are repeatedly, almost all of them, the vast majority, not all, the vast majority, are basically saying that, oh, this heresy has risen up amongst the Ishmaelites or the Hagarenes, the Mahagare, and they, this guy Muhammad, they'll say he's a false prophet, but he's brought the Arabs to the worship of the true God, the one true God, or he's dispelled idolatry, from Arabia, things like that. And we'll dig into those a little bit. And then on the Latin side as well, I think Gregory the Seventh, Bellarmine, Suarez, Pius X, even very recently, has basically said this. And if you take, I think the root of this problem is classical theism, right? The Orthodox and some Protestants don't like classical theism. We Catholics are more or less, I don't know about bound, but like it's pretty integral to our tradition, our intellectual tradition, and Latin sort of contemplation about God. So we can say that, yeah, we're referencing the same thing, right? Even though God is not a thing, we are referencing the same entity, but then there's a difference in terms of correct or incorrect understandings of him. So yes, we believe in the same God. Yes, we worship the same God. Now, that does not mean that Muslim worship is efficacious, right? This is also lurking in the background of this debate that, I mean, I think Jay Dyer said this. It's like, oh, okay, well, they might be referring to the same thing, but they don't accomplish anything. Fair enough. I mean, as Catholics, I mean, certainly if you read the preconciliar documents, and I think even implicit in the postconciliar documents, not even implicit, I think they are in the postconciliar documents or the conciliar documents, is the idea, that there's one way to God, there's one way to heaven, and that's through Jesus Christ. So Muslim rites, Muslim liturgies, the prayer, the salah, maybe even the fasting, certainly actually even the fasting is not efficacious unto salvation in itself. The Mass is salvific in itself. It's the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. It is that is our salvation, right? So that's a difference. Certainly that's a difference. So Muslims, the way I always put it to people is Muslims are trying to worship the one God. Whether or not their worship accomplishes something, Allahu Alam, God knows best. God is the knower. We don't know. And probably not, because the ordinary means of salvation is baptism, right? And a life in the sacraments. So probably not. But I mean, Athanasius Schneider had a quote, and I think Trent Horn mentioned it in his video. Most everyday, simple believing Muslims love God, want to submit to God's will as they understand it, have been taught Tawheed, right? They are not thinking through the doctrine of the Trinity. It hasn't even been presented to them in a remotely reasonable way, a remotely coherent way. You know, I mean, often, I mean, there's a lot of research on this. Christians very often don't understand the doctrine of the Trinity. So, and you know, we can get into, well, if Christians and Muslims can't worship the same God, Lydia McGrew says that their differences are so crucially necessary, right? That they're not worshiping the same entity or directing worship towards the same entity. Well, what do we say towards did Arians worship the same God, right? Did Philo of Alexandria, who was kind of a proto-Trinitarian, worship the God of Israel? You know, the God of Jesus Christ, the Father? I feel like you're backed into a corner where you just have to say no. And, you know, and then, you know, did Nestorians worship the same God as us? Well, St. John of Damascus calls Nestorius the Antichrist as well. You know, he calls Muhammad the forerunner to the Antichrist, but he also calls Nestorius an Antichrist. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's my short-ish take.
Before we go on, Hassan, somebody in the live chat reacted to you saying that there are some Muslims who understand that they think that the true God, like just God simpliciter, right? Nothing else. Not like God the Son, God the Spirit. That God, when you said that God the Father is God in Muslim eyes, right? Somebody was saying, I've never heard a Muslim person say that. So maybe could you just clarify your statement there? Or, I mean, I feel like...
Say that for me one more time.
Yeah, so somebody complained that they have never heard a Muslim say that what we refer to as God the Father is their God or is God.
I don't know, man. Talk to more Muslims. No, I mean, there's what's it called? Oh my gosh, Sheikh Omar Suleiman. I think he's one of these like popular YouTube sheikh guys. I mean, go look up the video where he says that. I've heard it my whole life. I think Khalil Andani says that to some degree, or like, you know, he's
like, I think what they would say is like, what you're calling God the Father, that's enough. We don't need to go any further, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
they will just say, don't say anymore. Like, that's it.
Right.
Like, God the Father is God. I mean, the difference we have, I think when we look at St. John of Damascus, this will become clearer. But the difference we have with Muslims is really how we can understand God, or what it's possible for God to reveal to us, right? So Muslims, right, they will say that we know he's one, like that's it. Like, we can't get into like processions or the status of the logos. This is bringing too much in from Greek philosophy. But I mean, come on, man. Like, there are many Muslims who have said this, very prominent Muslims.
And I want to say too that I think I realize now there was a misunderstanding in the live chat, because yeah, the Quran does deny that God is like a father who has begotten any children.
Yeah, of course.
That's explicitly denied. So,
Yes.
But that's not what you were saying. You weren't saying that God is a father, or that Muslims think that. Yeah, you were saying that what we call God the Father corresponds to the Muslim idea of that's God and that's it.
Sorry, let me be more clear. So yes, in Surah Ikhlas, you have he did not beget, and he's not begotten, right? قل يا أيها قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. There's no one like him either. So they'll say no to that, like God did not beget. They'll say that, you know, they usually balk away from calling him father. But even Zakir Naik, for you know, who, you know, brother asked a good question guy, says in a question answer session that, you know, when Jesus is referring to my father, that's you know, the God of Islam, right? And then the Christian asks him a pretty good follow up, which is, well, Jesus calls God his father, and then Zakir Naik kind of, you know, you can't compute. But they're of course not going to say that God begot, right? But they are going to say that when we are saying the Father, like when we say in the creed, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, that yes, we are referring to Allah. And that's, and Allah just means God, of course, in Arabic. I mean, Christian Arabs use Allah all the time. Open up the Liturgy of the Hours from the Melkite Church, you'll see Allah a bunch of times. So sorry, my apologies for that miscommunication there. So they would not call God a father, but who we call the Father, they would say, well, yeah, we're talking about him.
Yeah, so that's a good clarification. I got you the first time, so unfortunately that was in the live chat. Well, Hassan, I want to now get into the question of whether or not the claim of the Catholic Church that Christians and Muslims worship the same God somehow falsifies Catholicism. Right. And I know that this is going to get pretty dicey pretty fast. Maybe just to ease us into it, I want to tell you this story about from my time at Harvard. I want to get your thoughts on it. So there was a class that I was taking with a good Jewish friend of mine, and we were talking about there was another Catholic guy in the room who I'm also good friends with, and he brought up something about Jesus is the God of Israel. He's the God of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, right, of the Jewish people. And she said, we were talking about, the salvation of Jewish people. And she said something like, what if after I die, right, or whatever, I don't want to see Jesus? What if I don't want that to be the God of Israel or something like that? She said along those lines. And I'm kind of in my head, I get what she's saying, because, for her, Jesus is this kind of oppression, a symbol of Jewish oppression and so on and so forth. But I'm kind of in my mind, Jesus is the God of Israel, right? So it doesn't make sense for me in my mind to hear what she said, to think that, okay, there's anything, let's say, that Jesus is somehow not the God of Israel, that the God of Israel is somehow not Jesus. What she wants in my mind is Jesus, even if she doesn't know it that way or view it that way. And she did apologize later, actually, to me, because she said, I didn't mean to be so rough in class. And I was like, you're fine. If she had to vent, she had to vent.
Right.
But it was interesting how that question kind of, as we were preparing for this live stream, that memory came up in my mind. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with, John 1:18, no man had seen God at any time, but the only begotten Son who's in the bosom of the Father had declared him. And as Christians, we would just say that, the Logos is what mediates the, our experience of God. And that, the people of the children of Israel, experienced God through the Logos, but they knew not. Moses saw, the Logos in the bush, and so on and so forth. I mean, the idea of not wanting the God of Israel to be Jesus is no different from many people who look at the God of Israel on a, slavishly literal and, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll just say literal reading of the Old Testament. I don't like that word, but okay. Fair enough in common diction. Just a slavishly literal reading of the Old Testament. They see the God of Israel commanding, what would seem to modern people kind of pretty bad things. And they're like, why? Whatever. I mean, new atheists made this argument for 15, 20 years. They're like, well, I don't want to worship that God. If I woke up and, after I died and I was at the pearly gates, get checked in by St. Peter and I see God, I would ask him, why? Why did you command the execution of the Amalekites? Why did you want, why did you write in your holy scripture that, blessed is he who dashes your little one upon the rock? It's Psalm 137. And, this argument, I think what you're saying is just another version of this argument.
Right.
We can have sort of who we want God to be, and then there is who God is. And it's an interesting segue to the Islam question, because they obviously misunderstand and are incorrect about both who God is and the inner life of God, right? So they do not understand God in reality, right? They don't have a correct notion of God. They don't have Jesus says that, if you don't have the Son, you don't have the Father. Like, yeah, that's real. We're not discounting that. I'm not discounting that, and that's what saves. But again, can you have a misunderstanding about someone or something? In this case, the creator of all and the sustainer of being, but still, be thinking of him, or something. If I misunderstand, you, and I think you're actually someone else, right? Or maybe let me rephrase that. Maybe I think that you are, I don't know, you didn't go to Harvard Divinity School, but you went to Princeton Theological Seminary, right? Or, I think I mistake your dad for your uncle or something like that. It's like, would I then, when I say, oh, I'm on a live stream with Suan right now, would I be referring to someone else? No, I mean, I would just be wrong about some of my details about Suan Sonna. If I was at a cocktail party and I was like, oh, Suan, he was at Princeton Theological Seminary, and someone was like, no, actually Suan went to Harvard, and we had a disagreement. Well, we're both referring to Suan. I think it's helpful here to get into the text a little bit, if that's okay. So how should we back it in from more contemporary, from like Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium, or maybe we should go the other way?
How about we start with the Catholic documents, just so that people know, what are our sources and what does the church claim or not claim?
Great. Yeah, let's just take it in line then. We'll start with Nostra Aetate, right? So you can look this up. I'll read it briefly here. So Nostra Aetate reads, the church regards with esteem also the Muslims. Funny stop here. It says Muslims in Lumen Gentium and then Muslims here. Maybe that's an English translation issue, but anyway. The church regards with esteem also the Muslims. They adore the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heaven and of earth, and has spoken to men. Now this is the issue, really the issue also. They take pains to submit wholeheartedly to even his inscrutable decrees, just as Abraham, with whom the faith of Islam takes pleasure in linking itself, submitted to God. And then it goes on. They don't acknowledge Jesus as God, but revere him as a prophet, so on and so forth. But for our purposes, this is the relevant part. And I'll also read Lumen Gentium here. The plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator. In the first place amongst those are the Muslims, who professing to hold the faith of Abraham, along with us, adore the one and merciful God, who on the last day will judge mankind. So that's what we're talking about. And then there's a host of post-conciliar popes, especially John Paul II, who made a number of kind of further, moves, statements, etc., based on this. Now, I want to say one thing. What I'm defending, principally at least, is the letter of the documents of Vatican II, right? I don't think that there has been a falsification in the faith, because I don't think that there's a real contradiction between what Vatican II, the documents of Vatican II say, what came before it, and then subsequent magisterium as well, right? I do, however, think, when Pope John Paul II said in 2000, may St. John the Baptist protect Islam and all the people of Jordan who participated in this celebration. It's like, I'm not defending that. He probably should not have said that. That probably, maybe, protecting Islam in what way? Like, you could kind of, splice that a little bit, but I probably wouldn't have said it like that. Or, like, we're not talking about like, we're all going to kiss the Quran, or like, I see all the time. He probably shouldn't have done that either. I don't think it was an Arabic Bible. I don't think he thought it was an Arabic Bible. It's probably just a mistake. But, and then you see these photos of like, Benedict the 16th, like doing this, where this guy's giving Salah, right? The Muslim is starting to pray. I would really encourage someone to show me a video of Benedict the 16th then following the guy into like the sujood, right? He wasn't like saying the Muslim liturgy. He was standing there with his hands as the Muslim prayed, right? So, but you know, these are slightly different things. What we're defending, anyway, I kind of got off topic here, but what we're defending is the letter of, you know, serious magisterial documents. Okay. And Trent made this really good point in his video. The Second Vatican Council did not lay down any new dogmas, right? So we have to read the council, its documents, with a hermeneutic of continuity, you know, with in mind what came before it. Okay. So, all right. All that said, do you have any thoughts? Do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of thoughts, but I'm trying to figure out when's the right time to come in because I don't want to derail us. But basically, I think what you're doing here, Hassan, is you're making sure that we're on the right track, right? That we understand what the target is and what it isn't. Because, you know, the things that Pope St. John Paul II did on his own, or things that he said outside of his magisterium, those aren't, let's say, the ways that you falsify Catholicism.
Right.
He has his own pastoral decisions and ways that he wanted to approach the world, but that's different from, you know, like the actual core of the faith and what it, in fact, the church teaches on this universal and binding level. So there's that. Now, man, I'm trying to figure out when's the right time to come in with some of my thoughts. Are you going to go into like you're going next into like other like documents and statements from popes and
quickly?
Like
I'll run through it. I'll run through it quickly. Yeah.
How about you do that first? Yeah.
Sure. Sure. And also just to say, like, I mean, again, Trent Horn mentioned this, that, you know, Cyril, the Patriarch of Moscow, Bartholomew, the Patriarch of Constantinople, like they've made not similar statements maybe to JP2, but like similar statements in that Muslims and Christians adore or worship the one God. Yes. And what we need to keep in mind is, like, unless the Pope is speaking in like magisterially, whether that's repeated ordinary magisterium, right? Infallible ordinary magisterium, or he's speaking infallibly in his extraordinary magisterium. Like those two things have like very high special weight. A statement here or there while he's giving a speech, like, yeah, now they're put on the Vatican website and look kind of official, but I mean, we're not bound to that. But I'll move on quickly, and let's just go. I mean,
actually, since you mentioned that, let me just say two things real quick.
Please.
So there's a friend of mine on Facebook. I don't think he minds if I share his name. His name is Kevin. I think his last name is Gemma. And he has like was it 26 photos of just screenshots of like Orthodox patriarchs and saints who basically say things along the lines of like Vatican II, that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. So like you can go against that as I guess if you're an Orthodox, you can say, oh, that's what the patriarch said. That's what some individual saint said. Sure. But the thing is, like, you can't pretend as if that isn't in your camp as well. Right. And you also, I mean, you can shake it off and say, oh, but I'm my own Orthodox and I'm based on my own over here. But I mean, like, yeah, but just recognize.
Who said we're not based? We're all based.
Yes. Just recognize that that's you, but you got other guys and higher ups in your hierarchy who are saying similar things. Okay. So just acknowledge that you're kind of this small shrieking minority.
Right. Or
maybe it's more than I realized. But anyway, that's one thing. The other thing too about
be happy that your patriarchs and saints are also right.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention is that, with Vatican II, I remember I had Matthew Levering on my channel and we talked about Vatican II. Great episode. And Levering, he told me, you shouldn't really think about Vatican II in terms of what's fallible, what's infallible in it.
Sure.
Because what Vatican II is doing is it's giving the authoritative kind of almost summarization or restatement, going back into the tradition and laying out, what we believe as Catholics and how we can translate what we believe into communicating with the modern world, especially after the Holocaust and all the things that happened in the 20th century, which I will talk about later. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree with that. I think
mhm.
it's a great way to look at it. So
So
I'm
you
gonna
have to judge it on its content. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
absolutely
Mhm.
right. Yeah, I'm gonna quickly just turn here to Saint John of Damascus. Who is as critical of Islam as anyone else. But yeah, let's just go through his. I should have put a PowerPoint together. My apologies, but I'll just quickly read through some of his comments when he discusses the heresy of the Ishmaelites, right? Islam. So he says, Muhammad, learning from an Arian monk, devised his own heresy. He, sorry, misquote. Sorry, I lost my quote here. Okay. But he says that Muhammad, learning from an Arian monk, this is a very old trope, of Bahira or some monk that teaches Muhammad or recognizes his prophethood. He said, Muhammad, learning from an Arian monk, devised his own heresy, and he calls Muhammad the forerunner of the Antichrist. Now, we've already talked a little bit about the Antichrist motif. I mean, John uses this to refer to Muhammad, to the Emperor Leo III, to Constantine V, to the Patriarch of Constantinople, John VII, and also Nestorius, right? So we shouldn't put too much weight in that. I mean, you could say that's true. I mean, Catholic writers said that about Luther and other Protestant reformers. Anything that diverts or sort of obfuscates the Orthodox faith. But he introduces Islam as a heresy, right?
Mhm.
So this is the most important thing, that he sees it as a Christian heresy. Now, whether or not that's true historically is, I mean, a taxing debate, but that's at least how St. John of Damascus understands it, right? So he says that Muhammad, says that there is one God, creator of all things, who has neither been begotten nor has begotten. That's the bit I read earlier as well from Surah 112.
Mhm.
He, Muhammad, that is, says that the Christ is the word of God and his spirit, both in the Quran, but creature and servant. And that he was begotten without seed, he here referring to Christ, of Mary, the sister of Moses and Aaron. For he says the word and God and the Spirit entered into Mary and brought forth Jesus, who was a prophet and a servant of God. Okay, great. So that's how he introduces it. Now, again, he's using God here in a way that both Christians and Muslims, can refer to. He's not saying Allah. He's not saying, Muhammad taught that there was one pagan demon spirit that's worshipped instead of, God. He says that Muhammad says there is one God. Okay. Moreover, they call us associators because they say we introduce an associate with God by declaring Christ to be the Son of God and God. Now, here's his rejoinder. We say to them, the prophets and scriptures have delivered this to us, and as you persistently maintain, accept the prophets, right? So if we wrongly declare Christ to be the Son of God, and it's they who taught this to us, then, we're just following the prophets. Now, he goes on to say and defend Christianity by saying, as long as you say Christ is the word of God and spirit, why do you accuse us of being associators? For the word and the spirit is inseparable from that in which it naturally has existence. Therefore, if the word of God is in God, then it is obvious that he is God. If, however, he is outside God, then according to you, God is without word and without spirit. Consequently, by avoiding the introduction of an associate, you have mutilated him. Now, this is St. John of Damascus's principal charge against Islam, is not that they have introduced some, new God per se, but they have mutilated God in their understanding of him. They've made him without logos, right? Now, this is similar to arguments made against Arians by the Orthodox Christians in the 4th century. So, and it's important here that John ties Muhammad ultimately to an Arian monk when he's making this argument. So that's the first bit from St. John of Damascus. And
Hassan, basically what you were trying to show with that is, if we classify Islam if we conceptualize Islam as a Christian heresy, right? Or, if it's a heresy, it's like it's trying to aim towards something that's true in the Christian faith, but it just fails to do so.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So it's not just an error that's outside of us. It's somebody trying to, I don't know, in the community, in our ideas, in our theology, say something, but they just do it wrong.
Yeah, and I want to add one more quote from John, and this is from the Orthodox faith. He says, "We believe in one God, one principle, without beginning, uncreated, unbegotten, indestructible, and immortal, eternal, unlimited, uncircumscribed, unbounded, infinite in power, simple, uncompound, incorporeal, unchanging, unaffected, inalterate, invisible, source of goodness and justice, light, intellectual, and inaccessible, maker of all things, visible and invisible." Right? So that's pretty much the same language that Muslims will use, and he's quoting Muslims using about God, right? So a lot of, as came up in the comments and previously, like the unbegotten bit in the Muslim understanding of God or like not begetting or unbegotten bit is ultimately a disagreement, right? But the Father is unbegotten, right?
Right.
So, St. John of Damascus also says that. So, he calls Muslims mutilators of God, not worshipers of demons, right? Mm-hmm. That's the important bit from St. John. He never makes this argument of them being demon worshipers. He talks about the black stone in the Kaaba, right? Of having being like previously an idol of Aphrodite. There's God knows best, who knows, but there is evidence that, pre-Islamic Arabia at some point, probably way back, had like some worship of Aphrodite. But he's not saying that they worship Aphrodite at present. He's trying to poke fun at or discredit their rites. So that's St. John. Now we have Gregory the Seventh and his letter to Unzir, who, it's hard to verify who this is historically. It's the king of Mauritania. I would say that Unzir, which is like a Latinization of Nasir, is like a common epithet to a king. So some people have tried to challenge the historicity of this by saying, well, we don't have an Unzir. Well, it could just be, a king could often be called, Nasir, or, the Nasir. So Gregory says, God, the creator of all, without whom we cannot do or even think what is good, has inspired to your heart this act of kindness. He who enlightens all men coming into the world has enlightened your mind for this purpose. It's because Gregory has given, Unzir has given Gregory some gifts, released some captives. So Almighty God, I'm going back to the quote here, Almighty God, who desires all men to be saved and none to perish, is well pleased to approve in most of all that besides loving God, men love other men, and do not do to others anything they do not want to be done unto themselves. We must then show in a special way to the other nations an example of this charity, for we believe and confess one God. And he's saying we there as Gregory and Nasir, right? We believe and confess one God, although in different ways, and praise and worship him daily as the creator of all ages and the ruler of this world. For as the apostle says, he is our peace who has made us both one. Okay, so he explicitly says in his letter that Gregory and Nasir, that him and Nasir worship or adore the one God, the same God, right? And this is Pope Gregory the Seventh. He's a saint. You could say this is just a letter of his, but certainly it shows, regardless of the magisterial weight of this, it certainly shows that this idea that Muslims and Christians believe in the same God predates, way predates the Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate, or Lumen Gentium.
Right.
And if we go on from there, I mean, Tim Gordon read off a lot of these quotes from St. Bellarmine. He's talking about Jeremiah's prophecy. He talks about that. I'll just get to the important part of this quote. Jeremiah has this prophecy that all the earth will worship God. And so he says, Jeremiah predicted the future, that in the time of the New Testament, all men would come, that is the new covenant, all men would come to know the one God, who we certainly see now to have been fulfilled. For the Gentiles have converted to the faith, and also the Jews themselves, and the Turks, that is the Muslims, although they are impious, yet worship the one God, right? Suarez also, right? Unum tantum verum deum adorant. They also worship the one God. Most importantly, I think here we have the Catechism of Pius X, who says, the question, who are infidels? Infidels are those who have not been baptized and do not believe in Jesus Christ, because they either believe in and worship false gods, as idolaters do, right? So believing in false gods, the gods of the nations are demons here. Or although admitting to one true God, they do not believe in the Messiah, neither has already come in the person of Jesus Christ, nor as to come. For instance, Mohammedans and the like. So Pius X is very clear here also. They're infidels, and they also believe in the true God, right? Which, again, there's a distinction between what Muslims are trying to worship and whether their worship is efficacious, right? That's the distinction we have to maintain.
Hassan, do you have anything else that you want to go through in this section, or I do have some thoughts myself.
No, I mean, I would read, Ed Fazer has a good article making the philosophical case for this. It's on his blog, Christians, Muslims, and the Reference of God. I mean, this point has been made so many times, I don't even know if it's worth me making again, that, there isn't sufficient difference when we invoke classical theism and we're thinking of the one creator of the universe to say that Christians and Muslims are not at least referring to the same being. So I would check out that article.
Right. And a lot of this comes down to the question of what do you mean by same, right? Because, there's same in the sense of like no differences at all, right? All the same properties, you line everything up and it's exactly the same. That's one way to use the word same. The other way to use the word same is you're aiming towards the same object, right? The reference theory. But people just have, let's say, false or misguided beliefs about what the ultimate referent or certain facts about the ultimate referent, right? And I mean, I think that's what the church is doing with the latter. It's taking the latter position. But the other thing I want to say, just let me do my spiel real quick, Hassan, if you don't mind. One of the things that we have to keep in mind, right, is that Vatican II occurs after the Holocaust. It occurs after the First and Second World War. I mean, violence, misery, the creation of the atom bomb. I mean, all these things are going on in the world, and the Catholic Church is having to respond in that cultural moment. And the thing is, like before, right, maybe, it was easier to talk about like, okay, they're infidels, so they have the wrong religion. But then like people started seeing with especially World War II and the way in which the historic tradition of Christian anti-Judaism precipitated Nazism and the Holocaust, they realized, wait a minute, the way we talk about these things has real social consequences to them. So we need to be careful to not create a world of further division and hatred and bitterness, but a world where peace is possible, right? I mean, one way that you can try and get peace in the world is by the sword and convert everybody and get all the Muslims to be Catholics, whatever. Some people, I think, want that, right? But that's just not the way that things are really going to go down peacefully and reasonably, right? So the church has this stance where instead of being combative, we're going to try and instead, right, work from a place of grace and mercy and compassion and understanding, find what we understand and what, let's say, brings us closer together and what drives us further apart, and to work from there. Not to give up on evangelization, not to give up on proclaiming the truth of Catholicism, right? But finding a better way to go about expressing the truths of the faith. So, like people have said before online, like the Catholic Church has main character energy. I mean, I think with Vatican II, it had that main character energy because it saw that it had to take the initiative on addressing, let's say, the tradition of, well, not West and East of Christian anti-Judaism and other things to create a more peaceful world. This isn't to deny that, let's say, Catholicism is true. It's not to deny that Catholicism is the fullness of the truth, what have you, that there's no salvation outside the church. That's all true. But it's to understand and develop a better way of approaching the world. So that's one thing I want to say. Now, the other thing is with just like Islam itself, because obviously after 9/11, I mean, already, you know, people had negative views about Muslims, but especially after 9/11, it kind of took things to a whole new level. And I think that, I mean, I don't know if people have brought this up, but I feel like that looms in the background of this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's just the fact, well, if I can just say this, Hassan,
Please.
and I want to get your thoughts on this.
No, please.
Like, there are certainly things in Islam that I do not agree with and that I find that I just cannot endorse, you know, like I'm trying to speak carefully here, but like that I don't think are good. Okay. And I'm sure that there are liberals who are going to say the same thing about my conservative Catholicism. Fair enough. You know, it's free country. Say what you want. So I get that, but I sense in some people there's so much vitriol and bitterness towards Muslims that it's to the point that, like, even if you try to say anything nice about them or even be associated with them in any way, like, you know, like the nuanced claim that we're making that seems pretty, I think, fair, right? Like, okay, they're trying to worship the God of Abraham, and the God of Abraham's our God, God of Israel. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Just to even try and get in that proximate territory, they just use that as like, oh yeah, the Catholics are not serious, we can dunk on them, because of just how disgusted they are with Islam and Muslims, to the point where even if you put a peaceful hand forward towards them, that's somehow a dunk against you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to be said about all of that. And certainly I agree with that last bit, that, you know, you have this big push for like Judeo-Christian values, which is, I mean, some people have rightly said, well, I mean, if you look at the medieval Middle East or something, it's like, try distinguishing Judeo-Christian values from, you know, Judeo-Islamic values. And, you know, it's all contrived ultimately, I think. But yeah, the context of the 20th century certainly matters. I mean, I have a slightly different take on the past, like in terms of an evaluation of that pastoral strategy, I think long term, but I think, you know, people of kind of good intent can disagree on that. But I think you're right in terms of, you know, what given like necessary historical background to these, like what would motivate statements like this from the church? Well, it's trying to put a peaceful hand forward, right? And yeah, I mean, even before 9/11, there's like a lot of, I think, negative media portrayal of Muslims around like what happens in Iran, and you know, subsequently. And then certainly after 9/11, and I agree with you. I mean, like I'm not Muslim, you know, I'm not Muslim. So, but that being said, it's really easy to kind of, you know, like overly reactionary about these things, to say that, oh well, you know, I mean, there's a comment, and, you know, Christ is king. I agree, you know, but, you know, user Christ the King says that, you know, it's a mistake to call Islam a Christian heresy because, you know, Muhammad God referent came from a pagan deity named Baal or Hubal. Let me, I mean, if you read a book on like the Old Testament, you know, Baal is just like the name Lord, and it actually serves as some of the imagery behind, you know, the day of Adonai, the day of the Lord, and this, you know, some of the Son of Man imagery where, you know, God is riding on the clouds. Or, I mean, if you look at Chronicles versus First and Second Kings, you will see kind of these names that might had Baal in them, and then in Kings, and then the writer of Chronicles changes it to El, or, you know, Adonai or something in the name. So, but it's not real. I mean, Hubal and Baal are not the the reference behind Allah in the Quran, the God of the Christian God, I would say, or the God of Israel is. There's a good book coming out. I owe a lot to Gabriel Reynolds in terms of just my own thinking on a lot of this stuff. And he's coming out with a new book. I think it's something like The Rise of Islam in Christian Arabia or something of the sort. I should have the name right, but and if you look at the data on early Islam, right, the advent of Islam, because reality matters here, the Arabian Peninsula was already more or less monotheistic. There's not a single pagan inscription for like at least 100 years, if not more, leading up to Islam. Right in the north, in the south, it's actually much further back that you have any paganism. So this is already an area that's being evangelized, namely by Syriac-speaking missionaries. The Quran shows kind of very, I don't want to say like sophisticated or like deep, but like I would say a very entrenched Christian culture or atmosphere. It knows sort of a little bit of the inside baseball about debates between Melkites and Nestorians and Jacobites and so on and so forth. It's like, how? Well, because there are Christians around, right? So I think that this is like I think it's like a medieval polemic, and they were working with what they had, right? Now, this doesn't mean that Islam is like true revelation, but we should do our best here to work with reality, right? I live in reality. I do my best to live in reality. We should all try to live in reality. And the reality of the matter is that, the referent, like who Muhammad had, or the author of the Quran, let's say, if you want to be really historical critical, had, let's say in the Meccan Quran behind the term Allah, which actually isn't even the only term in the Quran used for God. A number of surahs don't even mention Allah at all. They say Ar-Rahman, which is a very Christian name for God. It's used by Christians in South Arabia forever. Not forever. I mean, for hundreds of years before Islam. And the Quran actually has a line that says that Allah and Ar-Rahman are referring to the same being. So, I mean, if you take the Ar-Rahman route, the merciful, Ar-Rahman means the merciful, then, you're even closer. But I mean, Allah is God as Christians or as Jews often loosely refer to him. And, likewise with Ar-Rahman, that's what's in the sort of air in Arabia. That's what's in probably the author of the Quran's head. I don't want to belabor the point here, but, it's important.
And I will say, Hassan, I've tried to be very careful about not saying all of my opinions about Vatican II publicly, but I will agree with you that I think you and I are on the same page that this kind of more sympathetic approach towards the world is in principle a better move than maybe something more combative and fierce. At the same time, though, I do agree with you that there are times where I kind of wish I wish that Pope said things differently, or I wish he didn't quite word it that way. So I'm not totally opposed to that either. And sometimes you have to and the church has done this too. She's laid down her foot, put the foot down and said, we can't cross this line. We're not going there.
No, of course.
So there are, it is a complicated thing, but, because it's not all just going to be black and white easily, the church has always done things the way that I think she should have done it. I mean, who am I? I'm a layperson. But leaving that aside.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing more. I'm looking at the comments. I shouldn't be, but I'm looking at them. Look, if you have to take the Islamic literary sources, which, you have a number of them. This is the story of Islam you often hear, right? Muhammad, 570, pagan Arabia, Mecca, Medina, the fights, blah, 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 blah. He goes up to the mountain, Hira, angel, etc. That's the story, the standard Islamic sort of narrative around the life of Muhammad. That material is all quite late. Most of it is very late. And scholars of Islam don't really use it. I mean, there's a little bit of disagreement, but you don't take it at face value. They do use it in certain ways, right? They try to get to the earliest substratum. But, the idea that Arabia was this pagan, teeming with pagans is fiction. It is completely fictional at this point. You could pretty confidently say that. And the material evidence just does not bear that out. The Quran does not bear that out. Now, there's probably some syncretism. There's probably little pools of paganism everywhere. Pools of paganism survive in the Christian Mediterranean for a while as well. So, but, if you're taking like a scholarly approach to this, the Muslim sources of the 8th century aren't necessarily accurate in the way that we would say like scientifically today. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I'll say on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Hassan. There was something else I wanted to say really quick, but okay. So maybe Hassan, before we go forward, I want to look at this comment here. So somebody said, but Suan, telling Muslims they worship together with us is a lie. That's not compassion. So, when you look at a statement like that, I'm trying to remember which document this person might be referring to, but leaving that to one side, like the church has made clear that she thinks, or she believes, or she professes that Muslims are trying to worship the God of Abraham, and we worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God of Israel, right? And insofar as they are doing that, they are together with us.
Right.
But obviously that doesn't mean, indifferentism, it's all the same. Who cares if you're Muslim, Catholic? I mean, the church has explicitly condemned that proposition that we can be indifferent. I mean, the thing is, like, when you can interpret that in a really uncharitable way, right? You can interpret that as, the church is saying that it's all good. They worship just in the same way that we do. I mean, that's not how it's using the word worship there, right? Especially if we're going to do this hermeneutic of continuity, right? If you're going to extend that charity of interpreting it with the hermeneutic of continuity.
Yeah.
So
let's be precise here.
Right.
Lumen Gentium says, along with us, adore the one and merciful God, right? Which is just a true statement. Maybe, you can have a private opinion that it shouldn't have been worded like that, or maybe it makes it seem like the mass and salat, Muslim prayer accomplish the same things. They don't, not even close, like incomprehensible difference between those two things. But, it's true that along with us, they adore the one true God. It doesn't mean that their rites are efficacious and give sanctifying grace in the way that the mass or the sacraments do.
Yeah. And like I said before, well, I'm not gonna belabor the point. Anyway, Hassan, where do you want to go next?
Oh, Captain, my captain.
Okay. Well, Hassan, do you have any more sources that you want to go through, or is that basically it?
No, I think. Look, if you look at those, right? Let me I'll put this together. My apologies for reading those quickly. I have been told that I speak too quickly. My wife and I are actually working on me speaking slower in preparation for this. So thank you for bearing with me. But to put a bow on this, there are certain things Catholics have always thought. Muhammad is a false prophet, right? Christ is the fullness of revelation. He was crucified, died, buried. He rose from the dead. The church is the body of Christ, the finished work of Christ. There's no salvation in some real sense outside of the church, right? Extra ecclesia nulla salus, right? The church is, Christ is the way. I'm not disputing any of those. And no, like the Catholic tradition has not changed its opinion on any of those, right? However, when we're speaking technically, philosophically, about whether or not Muslims worship the one God, look, most of Catholic, I don't know if there's been like an infallible magisterial declaration on it. There certainly, probably hasn't been. But we're talking about from the 8th century, in the early days of Islam. And I could have, I should make a plug here. Look at the book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It by Robert Hoyland. Okay. This book goes through contemporary Christian Jewish sources, a lot of Christian sources, which is what's important here, that talk about or give an account of Islam as the Arab conquests are happening. Take a look at some of the material in that book. All right. And what you'll see, just like what I've presented to you here, is that the vast majority of voices, that are reacting to Islam do not want them to conquer, the Levant or, anything, are opposed to Muhammad. Right. But admit that, they're worshiping God. They're trying to worship God. I always add trying because helps me get away from whether or not it's efficacious. They're trying to worship God, right? Like with error, etc. So, You go through St. John of Damascus. There are others. You go to Gregory the Seventh, Pope Gregory the Seventh. You go, and you could populate this more. You have medieval writers. I mean, I think if you take Aquinas seriously, in natural theology seriously, you basically also come to this. Suarez and Bellarmine. You just go through time. Pius X. I love Pius X. Okay, I have a portrait of Pius X, which I rescued from a basement of a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, up in my office. I love Pius X. Okay, I love the traditional Latin Mass. Like I love traditional Catholicism. Okay, Pius X in his catechism, which is worth reading, also says they're infidels, right? They don't have the faith of Christ, the faith of the church, salvific faith. But, they do worship and adore the one true God, right? And, the church teaches that, they can be, we can't say that they're de facto damned, right? But the ordinary means of salvation is baptism, and you get into, like, the ignorance questions, right? But you have, like, a natural sort of desire to worship and serve God. And that's all the Vatican II documents are saying. That's all Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate are saying. Now, there is, like, when you come to comparisons, like one of the commenters mentioned, yeah, that gets tricky. You could confuse a lot of people. Maybe there's a bit of weaponized ambiguity here. I'm open to that, right? These things were maybe worded carefully to be technically correct. You can get the spirit in the letter. I'm certainly not a proponent of the spirit of Vatican II, but look, if you look at the letter, that's true, right? They adore with us. They're not offering the Holy Mass, God forbid. They're not doing that. They don't have the sacrifice on Calvary, which saved us, but they're trying to worship God. It's that simple, really, in my mind. They're trying to worship God. Whether or not there's, efficacy behind that, probably not, but God knows. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Hassan, could you pull up maybe the Pius X quote, if you have it? And while you're doing that, let me just mention and thank Consecrated Soul for their super chat. $9.99, it's a lot. Consecrated Soul said, Muslims worship God naturally. Catholics worship the true God supernaturally via the Eucharist. That's right. Our worship is fundamentally different. Sure. They are not done together with us, per Bishop Schneider.
True.
Now,
all true. 100% true. Certified true. They if you're looking at Lumen Gentium, they adore with us the one true God. It's not saying they worship with us in
with latria,
Mass. That's not what's being said. So I agree with all those things. God bless you. Thank you for supporting Swan's channel. He's a good guy. And as for the Pius X quote, look at the 12th question. Who are infidels? Do you want to share
your screen? Just for the
hold on.
audience
Let me
sake?
I have it copied into a bigger document, but do you want to just pull it up, Swan? Could you just pull it up on the screen?
I don't have the document on me.
Oh, okay, here. Pius X Catechism. I mean, I have the quote, but I have a feeling the user won't trust it in my Word doc.
Yes. Yeah, you meddled with it or something, right, Hassan?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm happy to share my screen here. Okay. Mm-hmm. How do I do that? Oh, present. Okay, I'm being a boomer. Share screen. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Bam. All right, here we are. Catechism of St. Pope Pius X. Okay. Or Pro Nobis. No, I didn't make this. Okay. I guess I just found the PDF online, but here we are. It's been quoted many a time by, many people who've commented on this. Infidels are those who have not been baptized and do not believe in Jesus Christ. Muslims, right, as he mentions later, because they either believe in and worship false gods, that's one category, or though admitting one true God, they do not believe in the Messiah, neither as already come in the person of Jesus Christ, nor as to come. For instance, Mohammedans and the like, right? So yes, they're infidels, right? But they're not in this category. They're in this category. Okay? That's the important bit there.
Let me see here. And then and then Fraternidade Newman Brasso, he said something really nice. He said saying that they worship the same God is not the same as saying that they worship correctly or even in the same way as us. Right?
Yeah. Also, the Newman thing is important because John Henry Newman basically also makes this argument. Look, Consecrated Soul also says infidels equals idolaters. No, not necessarily. Not all idolaters. Oh, sorry, not all infidels are idolaters. All idolaters are infidels.
Yeah, and you know, Hassan, maybe before I just wrap up the episode, like one thing. Okay, so just like two thoughts that I have really quick, and then we can probably wrap it up. But basically, I understand that there are a lot of Catholics, especially after the Francis papacy, who have been tired of like ambiguous statements and things kind of teetering too close.
Can I say one thing here?
Yeah,
myself chief among them. I mean,
right.
I put myself in this category. Yeah.
All right, Pope Leo, you know who to hunt down. I'm kidding. But like, so after, you know, the Francis papacy, and also I've been very quiet about my opinions on the Francis papacy because I'm not trying to stir that pot. But like, I mean, since we're on this topic, you know, I'll say a few things. I get it, the frustration, and I also get the fact that people are tired of always being told, oh, we need to take it in the most charitable way, when it's like, can the church just kind of be a bit more clear, or like, you know, be more explicit in this thing, or, you know, not say it this way and say it that way instead. So I get that, you know. On the other hand, just as like, especially taking on the position in the diocese and I'm working under the bishop, like I've just noticed, I mean, I know that it's just been a few weeks since I started the job, but I started realizing, talking to just other deacons and priests, like how intense it actually is, because every little thing you say has enormous consequences for someone's spiritual life, or it could even affect an entire parish, or it can affect people way beyond you, right? And so people like the clergy in the church, the people who are working representing the church, and I guess that would include me now because I'm working under the bishop, we have to be very careful how we communicate to people. And sometimes when we get into these really difficult areas, you know, we want to communicate truth with grace. So we could say the based and orthodox thing in the most crude way possible. And some people, I think, want that. But then there's like, okay, but we can find a better way to express it. Now, of course, sometimes when you try to find that better way, you make mistakes. You might make things too ambiguous, whatever. But I'm saying that, like, at least I understand why the church is approaching things in that way. Now, like I said with you, Hassan, I wish that sometimes the church was a bit more like kind of putting her foot down on some things. But she does, right?
Certainly.
But like, you know, it's a delicate thing to be working with people's souls, and to also know that what you say as the Catholic Church can affect, I don't know, the lives of even people outside of the church, cause wars.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Say what you will. I mean, I'm not going to go into any detail on my own thoughts here, but say what you will. I mean, look at the Regensburg Address, which I completely agree with. There, you know, the extreme voluntarism that Pope Benedict XVI mentions is a legitimate part of, at least part of, the Islamic tradition, you know, and the uproar against that led to deaths in Muslim majority countries. So, you know, I mean, yeah, they have to be very careful. It's a big burden. So God rest, also, you know, Pope Francis, God rest his soul. So.
Right. All right. Well, Hassan, thank you for this episode today. I really appreciate it. We had a very lively live chat and also a conversation here. But Hassan, it's so good to see you, brother.
Always good to see you, Suan. And thank you, everyone, for your engagement. I hope this was clear. I would really encourage you, if anything wasn't clear, go look up what St. John of Damascus says yourself, or read the Catechism of Pius X. Check out the Ed Fazer article. I think philosophically he more or less nails it there. And yeah, thanks for having me on.